The trouble with talking about mental health is that it's always assumed to be dealing with something that's a problem, that's negative. We think and talk very differently about physical health because we think of people that go to the gym and they're fit and they're eating healthily and so on. So it's an all positive, upbeat thing. Why is mental health any different? Well, my theory is that we think negatively about mental health because no one has worked out what you can do to create mental strength. No one considers the possibility of achieving it. But actually recent research does make it possible. So let's talk about that. And let's just ask the question, well, if mental strength is possible, how would it change my life? Would I be less anxious? Would I be more in control of my emotions? Would I have better concentration? Would I find reading and comprehension easier? Would I be more organised? Would my sport be better? I'd be more consistent at chipping and putting in golf. But what if all of these things are possible? So let's have a look at what mental strength actually is. And is there something that we could do to transform our level of mental robustness? What is mental strength? It actually relates to the amount of brain space we can access to think. It's called our working memory, and it's at the front of our brain in our prefrontal cortex. We can't access anywhere else in our brain, so we can only access this little bit at the front called the thinking brain. That's the bit where we do everything. Wouldn't it be great if we could have more space there, more mental capacity? What are the things that happen already? Well, it's where we think about facts, pictures, names. It's where we make lists and so on. So it's where our memory basically functions, where all the things that we know can be recalled to our thinking brain so we can think about them. And when the thinking brain is very busy with stuff that shouldn't be there, guess what? Your memory isn't very good. It's also the space in your brain where you make decisions. The more space you have, the better decisions you make. And the less space you have, the more impulsive decisions you have. How does that happen? Well, when you've got a lot of space in your thinking brain, you can take in everything, the short-term implications, the long-term implications. Is it good for your health? Is it good for your wealth? And so on. And when you've only got a small amount of space there, you tend to only take into account your very immediate needs because there ain't space to bring everything else in. So you end up being far more impulsive. So increased working memory capacity impacts the quality of your decision making. But it's also where you rationalize things that are troubling you. It's where you put them in perspective. The more space you have, the more likely you are to be able to take in everything surrounding that thing that worries you so you can put it in perspective, so you can come up with a plan. When you've only got a small amount of space, you take in only the thing that's worrying you and then you ruminate about it. You just go round and round thinking about that. You can't bring in all of the other factors, all of the other facts, so that you can put it in perspective. So you end up worrying more, you end up being far more anxious because there's simply not the space to put that problem into perspective. It's also the space where you control your emotions. And the more space you have, the more mental capacity you have to control your emotions, the better you are, the less frequently you'll become frustrated or even angry. When you run out of space there, when it's full of stuff, then you've got nothing left, no mental capacity to control your emotions. So can you see all of these things are so important? The more space you have, the more mental strength you have. The brain is more robust, more resilient. Question now is, well, how do I get more space? Well, recent research has shown us an awful lot more about how we can get more space, how we can increase our mental capacities. And to understand that, we need to understand, well, what's filling it at the moment? Is there stuff there that needn't be there? And the answer is yes, because that's a very good question. And we need to understand what is it that is filling up our thinking brain. Well, it's going to get a little bit more complicated, but hang in there because it'll all make sense in a second. And it's to do with the skills. To make life easy, our brain automatizes everything that we do regularly. So nearly everything we do in a day, the brain's got an automatic process for to make it easy. And when it's automatic, we don't have to think about it. So the process of learning that is the process of turning what we are thinking about into things that are automatic so we don't have to think. And it applies to thousands and thousands and thousands of things. So you can imagine when a children's learning to read or learning to ride a bike, they're thinking a lot. When it's riding a bike, they're thinking about balancing, turning the pedals, leaning over to turn a corner. And of course, they're falling off. And they keep falling off until what? Until they've learnt. And what's learnt means? It means that instead of having to think about the pedals and think about leaning over and so on, it happens automatically without them thinking. In fact, until it's become automatic and they don't have to think, their processing in their brain isn't fast enough so that they don't fall off. The processing in our thinking brain is actually pretty slow, but it's pretty critical. So learning is turning thought processes into automatic processes so we don't have to think. And the same is true of all sorts of things, walking even. With walking, we're actually using a huge amount of information to help us balance and walk properly so we don't trip over and fall over. How do we do that? Because as a baby you learn to walk and automatize the process so you don't have to think. All of the other skills, and there's thousands of them, driving a car. We're terrible at driving a car until we've automatized the process. Those that are very good at cooking, they don't think about every detail in their cooking. Those that are good at socializing, are confident in it, being nice to people, they don't have to think about it. They naturally think about the correct things to say. Playing sport. When we're in the zone playing sport, we are not thinking. Doing maths. For some it's really easy and effortless because they don't have to think. The processes there all hardwired. So there's thousands of things. And thank goodness there is, because that's what makes life possible. We can do nearly everything in a day without thinking, leaving our thinking brain free to make the decisions, to put things in perspective and make lists and so on. But, and this is a huge but, researchers tell us about 1 in 6 typically of our skills that we try and develop never get completely automatized. That means a few of the things that other people find easy, we're going to find hard. And the reason is because we still have to think about them because the brain wasn't able to finish off the development of that automatic process. So, okay. And for most of us, hopefully, those things that we don't become a natural at are those skills that we actually find they're not that important. So we develop a life where we avoid doing those things so we don't have to worry about them. But the trouble is, some of those skills are really important. And occasionally it'd be really important things like listening. So when we listen, what we hear isn't instantaneously and effortlessly turned into something we comprehend. In other words, the skill of turning sound waves into comprehended thoughts isn't fully developed and we still have to think about it. And cruelly we often say, you can see his cogs whirring when he's listening. So that's a fundamental thing. We don't kind of tend to think about this because no one's explained it to us before. But if that happens to be a particular skill that isn't fully developed, your thinking brain is going to be full of a process that shouldn't be there. And remember, this is a precious space in our thinking brain, and when it's full of stuff that shouldn't be there, it's reducing our mental capacity. For others, it's reading that's hard work. And very often the reason for that is their eye tracking, the movement of their eyes so it goes to the right place on the sentence so they can read effortlessly. Their very eye tracking skills hasn't become fully automatized. Therefore, they're having to think about where to put their eyes. And guess what? That fills up the thinking brain. It makes comprehension very difficult. It makes reading very difficult. And it reduces your mental capacity. For others, it might be physical clumsiness. They're a bit clumsy in the way they move. The coordination of their limbs and balance hasn't ever been perfected. So that can fill up your thinking brain, because all of these are skills that we need a lot. So can you see, when we've not fully developed key skills, it can fill up our thinking brain and reduce our mental capacity without us realizing. So all of those things that we should be doing, making good decisions, putting things in perspective, not being anxious but being confident, all of those things suddenly become harder work for us with less mental capacity because fundamental skills haven't been fully developed. Is this making some sense? And it's not just that it's hard work, it's that the skill can't be performed and the mental capacity is being reduced at the same time. Same is actually true of social skills too. If you're a bit shy or socially clumsy, or some have spatial awareness, they bump into things, they're not very good at certain types of team sport and so on. All of these are the kind of skills we use a lot that may not be fully developed and therefore may be filling our thinking brain and reducing our mental capacity. Those skills have not been finished off. You're not a natural at them. Nothing to do with your level of intelligence. You've actually got loads of potential in your brain, because potential is to make new connections. Yeah, we've got that, but it just hasn't happened. So it's nothing to do with intelligence, it's to do with the completion of critical skills. And your thinking brain is the bit that suffered. It's the mental capacity that goes down. Well, now you're thinking, those little limitations, I've kind of got used to them. Are they really stopping me being mentally robust? Yeah, that's the way it is. It's stopping you being resilient, stopping you being mentally strong. And of course, you probably want to do something about it. Well, is there something we can do? Fortunately, there is. Now, to my knowledge, as at today, there isn't a direct way of increasing our working memory capacity. But there's a very good indirect way. And that's by getting rid of the processes that shouldn't be there. And that can make a huge difference. So during the last 20 years or so, scientists have discovered a lot more about how the brain creates those skills and what we can do to finish off, completing those skills that haven't been finished off up till now. So it can be done. And it can be done using exercises that create plasticity. What's plasticity? It's about getting the brain ready to learn more, to make more connections. Big problem is that everybody's brain is actually totally unique. So the exercise programs that people need to go through to stimulate the brain in the right way, to create that plasticity, is itself needs to be customized to suit each individual brain. Well, that's all possible too, and that's a program that I've been working on for many years now. And it only takes 10 minutes a day, but what it's doing is stimulating the brain to target unfinished skills so that they become fully learned. You become more of a natural. So you don't just get better at the skills, you actually free up that precious working memory. You get more space in that very part of the brain that determines how mentally strong you are, how resilient you are, how robust you are, how on top you feel. And the bonus is, of course, that the very things that you've not been a natural at, that have been hard work, become far easier. So this, what I'm describing to you, is actually a natural process. And the wonderful thing is that it uses the very part of the brain, the cerebellum, that creates lasting change. So the upsides are huge. You imagine having more mental capacity, feeling more on top. Does this make sense to you? Can you think of anybody affected by this? Does it apply to you? Does it apply to your partner, to your children, to your work colleagues and so on? Well, if it does, you can now look on them in a new light, because they're not choosing to be the way they are. They're hardwired to be the way they are. And when you've low working memory, it's not a choice for them whether they suffer poor attention, poor emotional control, poor memory or poor organization and so on. It's because their working memory capacity is reduced. So give what I'm sharing with you a try, because you've got nothing to lose. And by the way, share this with everybody that you can think of suffering from symptoms of overwhelm, some suffering from symptoms of low levels of working memory, low levels of mental robustness, mental capacity. And I wish you all the best.